Superman meets his demise at the hands of supervillain Doomsday in the seventh.
Vulnerable as the mere mortals who've looked up to him for more than half a century. Superman died Wednesday.
Death of Superman. Superman issue 75, The Death of Superman, written by writer-artist Dan Jurgens and comic inker Brett Brenning, was one of the biggest comic book events of the 1990s, selling over 6 million copies, making it the top-selling comic of 1992. DC Comics did a good job marketing this comic, making it seem like this would be the last time Superman, the first American superhero, would be in print. Gone forever, permanently. The mainstream media of the time went crazy over this comic. The Death of Superman was covered by multiple news outlets such as People's Magazine, Newsday, and Newsweek. SNL did a comedy sketch on the funeral of Superman.
Not bad. Thank you for coming. I said I wasn't gonna cry.
The Death of Superman was a mega success for DC Comics, bringing in $60 million in its first day. Sales from this comic helped double DC's market shares at the time. This comic came out at the peak of the speculator bubble, so many people, from fanboys and collectors hoping to flip this book, were buying this comic up. Many comic book shops had lines around their corners of people waiting to get a copy of this book. Some comic book shops even had to put a limit of copies that customers were able to purchase. Eventually, as we all know, Superman will be brought back to life in the Adventures of Superman number 500. Most fans figured this was a matter of time that Superman was going to be brought back to life.
To defend Metropolis, and from New York to Los Angeles, faithful readers are snapping up the final Doomsday issue, even though many are skeptical about Superman's demise.
Oh, I think he'll come back as the same. It just, they'll make up a story how he can come back, but he'll come back.
He'll come back souped up. You know, they souped up Superman. That's what it is.
But those fans who didn't know were pissed.
Death of Sad Sack. This better not be another fake out.
Many comic book tastemakers of the time believed that The Death of Superman was just a publicity stunt in order to boost sales, which it did. The sales for each of the comics that were part of this event began to decline after The Death of Superman.
Well, are they killing off the character? I killed him once. I just happened to bring him back to life in the same issue. It's just to sell comic books. I mean, I can't believe fans are even noticing it. I mean, how many times has Spider-Man died? How many times has everybody died? It's just a ploy to sell comics. We have a saying in comics: nobody dies forever. You know, nobody stays dead. And Superman is the second most successfully merchandised character in the world, right after Mickey Mouse. He's not going to stay dead.
Others said that DC was trying to cash in on the speculator boom of the time. DC was trying to get in on all the money that Marvel was making with the X-Men comics, and now having to compete with the birth of Image Comics, which is also selling like gangbusters. The writers at DC denied these allegations. Dan Jurgens didn't even know this comic was going to sell as many issues as it did.
Main reason that Superman is dying is that in our story conferences we came up with a story that was too powerful not to do. Dan Jurgens originally came up with the idea of doing a Death of Superman story, and he also wanted to do a new major physical threat for Superman to fight. That threat became Doomsday, and it became part of the Death of Superman story. Now, it was purely a creative concept. It wasn't, marketing didn't come to us and say, we'll sell 1 million copies if we kill him off, and then just bring him back the next week. We're not going to do that. The creative people came up with this.
Either way, this comic had a lasting impact, especially on those fanboys of the time, specifically these two comic book fans we're going to talk about next. Cartoonist Kayfabe. Cartoonist Kayfabe is a comic book commentary channel ran by Jim Rugg and Ed Piskor, both successful cartoonists in their own right. Ed Piskor was best known for his New York Times bestseller Hip Hop Family Tree, and Jim Rugg with Street Angel. They both decided to start a YouTube channel where they would read old Wizard magazines and comic books of their youth. They posted daily videos on their channel. Jim and Ed were full of knowledge when it came to comic books and comic book culture, as well as the craft of making comics. So every time you watched one of their videos, you would more than likely come out of the video learning something new. They ran through so many different types of comics, from the most underground comics like Robert Crumb's Zap to the top-selling X-Men #1, giving their opinions, critiques, and overall thoughts on each and every one of these comic books they looked at, gaining a pretty strong following on YouTube, with this channel peaking around 95k subs. One of these popular comics that Ed and Jim looked at was Superman number 75, The Death of Superman. During this video, Ed and Jim did their usual thing, giving their opinions on the book, the story, and artwork. They talked about how popular this comic was at the time. They also talked about how underwhelming the Death of Superman was, and what little things could have been done to make this comic better. One person that was watching that Kayfabe episode was so inspired they created this, Death of Power. Influenced by the Kayfabe episode mentioned before, Death of Power was created by cartoonist Kirt Burdick, who had been drawing and cartooning for a very long time, making comics that were from the sci-fi and fantasy genres to true crime comics. Kirk saw this Kayfabe episode and was motivated to create his own take on the Death of Superman story. Discovered the book from like the Cartoonist Kayfabe thing, right? Yeah. So whenever you got, because it was from the Death of the Superman episode where they were talking about like somebody should just do another one and make it better. So whenever you heard that like call to action, how long did it take for you to like, you know, let me do it myself to get yourself working on that?
So I watched that episode that week it came out, and I was cracking up at like some of the, you know, what Jim Rugg and Ed Piskor were saying about it. Yeah. Because it is kind of a classic episode. Just their Superman 75 review was pretty fun. And they made this shout out. And I just recently did a like short 10-page comic for another contest that ended up being defunct. But so I was already in that kind of mode of like just doing whatever. And it was still during COVID. It's like tail end of the lockdown, and I was still unemployed. You know, I was still on furlough for my job. So I just said, fuck it, I'm going to do it. And then I was like, should I do it? And I did a little thumbnail of it. I did this fan expo, the first fan expo in San Francisco. At that con, I thumbnailed everything out, like worked out like the pacing and everything. I was debating, should I do this? Should I not? It's, you know, fuck it. And then, you know, a couple of friends of mine said I should just do it. So I went ahead and, you know, got it done relatively fast, like within a month, got it pretty much done, maybe a month and a half. And I was like really happy with it. I thought like it came out good. And for me, like a month and a half was like super fast.
And this comic is masterfully crafted, in my opinion. The Death of Power is a underground, bootleg, outlaw, Doichi style Superman comic with tons of blood, guts, gore, and a sprinkle of graphic X-rated content that I can't show to you on YouTube, but it's totally fun. Typically, I'm not really into these type of comics, but Kirk's artwork mixed with this craftsmanship and design of these books kept me wanting to read more. Burdick's uses of colors to add impact to scenes and the overall structure was amazing. His usage of onomatopoeia and sound effects is also top tier as well. Burdick is keeping the Death of Power to the tradition of the Doichi style comics with this story. If you don't know, Doichi is the Japanese term for self-published printed works such as magazines, manga, and novels. Part of a wider category of doujin works, Doichi are often derivative of existing works and created by amateurs, though some professional artists participate in order to publish material outside of the regular industry. Pretty much, it's just an outlaw underground scene made in Japan. There are more nuances when it comes to doujin and that whole entire culture, but I'm gonna keep it simple for the sake of this video. I'll link a great video in the description that goes more into depth about doujin culture. To me, the Death of Power shows how amazing the comic book indie scene can be when there are no rules for the creator to just go wild and create what they want and what they enjoy. When there isn't a sales quota to meet, just letting the creators run wild with their creativity and artistic skills. The Death of Power is a product of what happens when a real community comes together. Kirk sold out of his fan comic quickly once the Cartoonist Kayfabe gave him a nod on his comic through a video they posted on their channel.
I got a heads up from a friend of mine online that I was going to be featured on Cartoonist Kayfabe, and I got a message from Ed, saying to get ready. It was pretty wild. It was pretty fun, and then they did a really, really nice, flattering review of it. And, I sold out of those copies pretty quick, through the King Kayfabers, I think, So yeah. And then since that got, I got a pretty good response. I mean, the best response I've ever gotten in comics, really. I wrote out an outline of where I would, like, if I was going to do the whole Death of Superman arc, I wasn't going to do what Dan Jurgens did and wrote. I wasn't going to just do a direct spoof of that. So I was going to do like my version of how like a character like Superman or a superhero universe would conclude. That was like my intention.
Kirk has been rolling with this comic ever since, making the story more and more into his own as the comic has gone along. He is currently on 6 issues, working on the 7th. He's been funding these books through Kickstarter, very successfully, I might add. So go give Kirk a follow and show him some love. So that's Death of Power. Like I was saying before, Death of Power is pretty much what happens when you let a creator just run wild and have fun with their creation, with their comic that they're making. I feel like a lot of people don't do that or realize that you can have fun while you're making these books, these manga, these comics. A lot of people, I feel like, put themselves in a structured box and want to confide by the things that they're influenced by, which is good. I understand wanting to be like your influencer, but it's also, this is like, comics is an artistic form, an artistic expression, right? You should be able to make what you want and do how you want and not feel like you need to confide or be a part of the system that it is. You know what I'm saying? Like, we should want to innovate and create our own new things. So, and that's what Kirk did with this Death of Power book, right? He is essentially making his own Justice League story, whether it's crude or violent or what, you know, whatever have you. It's still a fun comic to read. And even myself, from reading this, I've learned so much about design work and how you can use the intricacies of color work and your sound effects to make more of an impact on your storytelling. So it's just a fun, awesome comic. I'm sure he's gonna have a Kickstarter coming out soon, within the next few months. So whenever he does, I would highly recommend go checking it out and picking up a copy. You know, it's 18 and older, so if you're an adult, I would highly recommend it. If you're a kid, I wouldn't, you know, read it, buy it, whatever. Anyways, it's also awesome to see how a community was able, or a YouTube channel was able to affect so many creators in a real way, like with Kirk, and how they had their channel, this Cartoonist Kayfabe channel, influence Kirk to make this book and influence others to do so as well. And Cartoonist Kayfabe had this thing called the Kayfabe effect, which essentially was real. It was a real thing, whether it was just people buying up a old back issue of comics that were gone and forgotten about, or never were really niche and nobody knew about, or influencing creators to make their own books and their own works, right? Myself, I created my own outlaw independent comic as well. Spider-Man Nobody Safe, which was my first iteration in like to printing my own work. You can download it for free on my website now. I have a couple comics on my website you can download for free. I'd highly appreciate if you did check them out and give me some feedback. Also, I appreciate Kirk for giving me his time to doing that interview. You can watch the full interview with Kirk Burdick on my live stream tab. So you go to the live stream tab. I've been doing these live stream interviews called Convos with Kova, where I essentially interview / podcast with a bunch of creators that I find interesting, and I want to hear their story as well as tell my story, and we can learn and you know, our place in this big old ether of comics and comic creation. I appreciate you guys for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.